Lisa was always the type of person who had everything under control. At 34, she ran her own graphic design business from home and was known for never missing a deadline. Her friends often joked that she could probably design a logo while running a marathon, and honestly, they weren't far from wrong. She had completed 3 marathons in the past 2 years and was already training for her 4th. But something started changing on a Tuesday morning in March. Lisa was sitting at her computer, working on a new logo design for a local restaurant. She had been sketching the same curved line for what felt like the 100th time, when her hand suddenly jerked to the right. The pencil made an ugly scratch across her carefully planned design. "That's weird," she muttered to herself, staring at her hand like it belonged to someone else. She flexed her fingers a few times and went back to work. But 20 minutes later, it happened again. This time, her whole hand seemed to shake for just a second before going back to normal. Lisa tried to ignore it. Everyone gets tired hands from too much computer work, right? She had been putting in long hours lately, trying to build up her client base. Maybe she just needed a break. She decided to go for her usual morning run around the neighborhood park. Running had always been her therapy. The moment her feet hit the pavement, all her worries would melt away. But today felt different. About half a mile into her run, her left leg felt heavy, like she was dragging a weight behind her. She slowed down, thinking maybe she hadn't warmed up enough, but the feeling didn't go away. "Come on, legs, don't fail me now," she whispered. Trying to push through it, she managed to finish her usual 3-mile loop, but it took her nearly 10 minutes longer than normal. When she got home, her husband Mike was already getting ready for work. "How was your run?" he asked, not looking up from his coffee. "Fine," Lisa lied. She didn't want to worry him over what was probably nothing. Mike worked long hours as a construction supervisor, and the last thing he needed was her complaining about a bad morning. But the bad mornings started becoming more frequent. Over the next few weeks, Lisa noticed her handwriting getting messy. She had always prided herself on her neat, artistic handwriting. Clients would often compliment her on the beautiful way she signed contracts. Now, her signature looked like it belonged to a completely different person. The letters were shaky and uneven. One afternoon, she was having lunch with her best friend Jenny at their favorite cafe. Lisa was holding her coffee cup with both hands, something she never used to do, when her grip suddenly loosened. The hot coffee spilled all over the table and onto her white shirt. "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" Jenny jumped up, grabbing napkins from the dispenser. Lisa stared at her hands in confusion. I don't know what happened. I was holding it. "Fine, and then maybe you're just tired," Jenny said kindly, helping clean up the mess. "You've been working so hard lately." But Lisa knew it wasn't just tiredness. Something was happening to her body, and she couldn't control it. That evening, she tried to button her favorite blouse before dinner. Her fingers fumbled with the small buttons like she had never dressed herself before. It took her almost 5 minutes to do something that should have taken 30 seconds. During dinner with Mike and their 16-year-old daughter, Amy, Lisa noticed her fork felt heavier than usual. Halfway through eating, her hand started trembling slightly. She quickly put her fork down and folded her hands in her lap, hoping nobody would notice. "Mom, are you feeling all right?" Amy asked, looking concerned. "You seem different lately." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Lisa said, forcing a smile. Just a little stressed with work. But she wasn't fine, and deep down, she knew it. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while Mike slept peacefully beside her. Her mind was racing with questions. Why were her hands shaking? Why did her legs feel so heavy during runs? Why couldn't she control her own body anymore? The next morning brought another frightening moment. Lisa was in the bathroom getting ready for the day when she tried to apply her makeup. As she brought the mascara wand to her eye, her hand jerked suddenly. She nearly poked herself in the eye and had to grab the bathroom counter to steady herself. Looking in the mirror, she saw a woman who looked exactly like her but felt like a stranger. Her reflection stared back with the same brown eyes and shoulder-length black hair. But something fundamental had changed. It was like her brain was sending messages to her body. But the messages were getting lost somewhere along the way. At work, things got even more difficult. Lisa was known for her precise mouse movements and perfect graphic designs. But now, clicking on small buttons became a challenge. She would aim for one spot on the screen, but her cursor would end up somewhere completely different. Simple tasks that used to take minutes were now taking hours. One particularly bad day, she was working on a detailed illustration for a wedding invitation. She had been working on it for 3 hours when her hand spasmed and deleted the entire layer she had been working on. All that work gone in a second because her body wouldn't listen to her brain. Lisa put her head in her hands and wanted to cry. This wasn't just about being tired or stressed. Something was seriously wrong, and it was getting worse. She could feel her body rebelling against her, like it was fighting a war she didn't even know she was in. The scariest part wasn't the physical symptoms themselves. It was the feeling of losing control of something she had always taken for granted. Her body had always been reliable, strong, and responsive. Now it felt like she was trying to drive a car with broken steering. She started avoiding social situations, making excuses not to meet friends for coffee or dinner. The thought of dropping something in public or having her hand shake while writing a check was too embarrassing to risk. She began ordering groceries online instead of going to the store, afraid of what might happen if her symptoms acted up while she was out. Mike started noticing the changes too. Even though Lisa tried to hide them, he would catch her staring at her hands with a puzzled expression, or notice how she now needed both hands to carry things she used to handle with one. But every time he asked if everything was okay, she would brush off his concerns with a weak smile and change the subject. The most heartbreaking moments came when Amy would ask for help with something that required steady hands, like helping her with a difficult zipper or braiding her hair for a school event. Lisa would have to make excuses or ask Mike to help instead. She could see the confusion in her daughter's eyes, wondering why her usually capable mother suddenly couldn't do simple things. As the weeks passed, Lisa felt like she was becoming a prisoner in her own body. She would wake up each morning hoping that the strange symptoms had been just a bad dream. But they were always there, waiting for her. Her body was changing, and she had no idea why or how to stop it. The woman who once felt invincible, who could run for miles and work for hours with steady hands, was slowly disappearing. In her place was someone who felt fragile and uncertain. Someone who could no longer trust her own body to do what her mind wanted it to do. 2 months had passed since Lisa first noticed her hands shaking, and things were getting much worse. What started as occasional tremors had become a daily battle that she was clearly losing. Every morning felt like waking up in someone else's body, and that someone else was not cooperating at all. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. Lisa's alarm went off at 6:30, and she reached over to turn it off. But instead of the simple tap she intended, her arm jerked wildly, knocking over the glass of water she always kept on her nightstand. The crash woke up Mike, who sat up, looking confused and worried. "What happened?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Lisa stared at her arm like it had betrayed her. "I don't know. I was just trying to turn off the alarm." Getting dressed that morning took almost an hour. Each button on her shirt felt like climbing a mountain. Her fingers wouldn't grip properly, and they kept slipping off the smooth plastic. By the time she finally managed to get her clothes on, she was exhausted and frustrated. Mike had already left for work, probably thinking she was just running late. At her computer, things got even worse. Lisa had a big project due that afternoon for a new client. She had been working on a logo design for weeks, and it was almost perfect. But as she tried to make the final adjustments, her hand suddenly jerked to the left. She watched helplessly as hours of work disappeared from the screen. "No, no, no," she said out loud, frantically trying to undo what had happened. But it was too late. The file was corrupted, and all her careful work was gone. She put her head in her hands and felt tears building up in her eyes. This wasn't just frustrating anymore. It was terrifying. The tremors weren't staying in her hands either. over the next few days. Lisa noticed her arms starting to shake too. Then her shoulders would jerk unexpectedly, making her bump into walls and door frames. She started wearing long sleeves all the time to hide the constant movement, even though it was getting warmer outside. The worst part was trying to eat. Lisa had always enjoyed cooking and eating with her family, but now every meal felt like an obstacle course. Soup was impossible because the spoon would shake and spill everywhere. Even holding a sandwich became difficult when her hands wouldn't stay steady. One evening, the whole family was having dinner together. Lisa was trying to cut her chicken when her hands suddenly spasmed. The fork flew out of her grip and clattered across the table, landing on the floor. Amy jumped in surprise, and Mike just stared. "Mom, what's going on with you?" Amy asked, her voice filled with concern. "You've been acting really strange lately." Lisa felt her face getting hot with embarrassment. She couldn't even eat dinner normally anymore. "I'm sorry, honey. I think I'm just tired." But she could see in Amy's eyes that her daughter didn't believe her. Mike didn't believe her either. The worried looks they kept giving each other when they thought she wasn't watching made her feel even worse. Sleep became almost impossible. Just when Lisa would start to drift off, her body would jerk or twitch, waking her up again. She would lie in bed for hours, feeling like she was trapped inside a machine that was breaking down. Her legs would kick involuntarily, sometimes hard enough to wake up Mike. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Mike suggested one morning after another sleepless night. "This has been going on for months now." "I'm fine," Lisa insisted, even though she knew she wasn't fine at all. The thought of going to a doctor and hearing that something was seriously wrong with her was more frightening than pretending everything was normal. But pretending became impossible when Lisa had what she would later call her worst day yet. She was at the grocery store, something she had been avoiding for weeks. She needed to buy ingredients for Amy's birthday cake, and she couldn't put it off any longer. Everything started fine. She managed to get a shopping cart and began walking through the aisles. But as she reached for a bag of flour on a high shelf, her arm jerked violently upward. The bag fell, split open, and covered her in white powder. Other shoppers stopped and stared as Lisa stood there covered in flour, feeling completely helpless. "Are you okay, dear?" an elderly woman asked kindly. Lisa wanted to say yes, wanted to laugh it off and pretend it was just an accident, but the words wouldn't come out right. Her mouth felt strange, like her tongue was too big. When she finally managed to speak, her words came out slurred and unclear. I'm fine," she managed to say, but even she could hear how wrong she sounded. The store manager came over to help clean up the mess, and Lisa felt like everyone in the entire store was watching her. She abandoned her cart and hurried out to her car, her face burning with shame. But when she tried to put the key in the ignition, her hand was shaking so badly she couldn't get it in the slot. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, crying and trying to calm down enough to drive home. When she finally made it back to the house, Mike took one look at her flour-covered clothes and shaking hands and knew something was very wrong. "That's it," he said firmly but gently. "We're making a doctor's appointment tomorrow. No more excuses." That night at dinner, Lisa tried to act normal for Amy's sake, but it was hopeless. When she tried to take a drink of water, her hand shook so badly that water spilled down her shirt. Amy looked like she was about to cry. "Mom, please tell me what's happening to you," Amy said quietly. "I'm scared." Lisa realized that her attempts to hide her condition weren't protecting her family. They were making everyone more worried and confused. But she still couldn't bring herself to admit that she didn't know what was happening to her own body. The tremors were spreading to her legs now, too. Walking became unpredictable. One moment she would be fine, and the next her leg would give out or jerk to the side, making her stumble. She started holding onto walls and furniture as she moved around the house, afraid of falling. The scariest moment came when Lisa was alone in the bathroom. She was brushing her teeth when suddenly her whole face felt strange, the muscles round. Her mouth started twitching, and she couldn't control them. Toothpaste dribbled down her chin as she stared at herself in the mirror, watching her own face move in ways she couldn't stop. For the first time, Lisa truly understood that whatever was happening to her was bigger than stress or tiredness. Her body was changing in ways that didn't make sense, and it was happening fast. The woman who used to run marathons could barely walk across a room without stumbling. The artist who created beautiful designs could barely hold a pencil steady. She felt like she was disappearing, being replaced by someone who couldn't control their own movements. Every day brought new challenges and new fears about what might happen next. The simple activities that everyone takes for granted, like getting dressed or eating a meal, had become major accomplishments. But the hardest part wasn't the physical problems. It was the feeling of being betrayed by her own body, the thing she had always been able to count on. Lisa felt like she was fighting a war against herself, and she was losing badly. The first doctor's visit was nothing like Lisa had expected. Dr. Johnson was a kind man in his 50s who had been their family doctor for years. He listened carefully as Lisa described her symptoms, nodding occasionally and taking notes. But when she finished talking, his response made her heart sink. "It sounds like you've been under a lot of stress lately," he said with a gentle smile. "Running your own business, taking care of a family, it can really take a toll on your body. I think we should start with some anxiety medication and see how you feel in a few weeks." Lisa wanted to scream. This wasn't stress. She knew what stress felt like, and this was completely different. But Dr. Johnson seemed so confident in his diagnosis that she began to doubt herself. Maybe she was just imagining that her symptoms were worse than they really were. The anxiety medication did nothing except make her feel tired and foggy. The tremors continued. The stumbling got worse. And now she had to deal with feeling like she was walking through thick mud all day. After 2 weeks, she stopped taking the pills. Mike wasn't satisfied with Dr. Johnson's answer either. He had been watching Lisa struggle for months now, and he could see that this was more than just stress. One morning, after Lisa dropped her coffee cup for the 3rd time that week, he made an appointment with a specialist without asking her first. "I know you don't want to make a big deal out of this," he said, "but I can't watch you suffer like this anymore. We're seeing a neurologist next week." Dr. Peterson's office was different from their family doctor's office. Everything was more serious, more clinical. The waiting room was full of people with walkers and wheelchairs, and Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't belong here with these sick people, did she? The neurologist was a woman about Lisa's age with short gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. She watched Lisa walk across the room, asked her to hold her arms out straight, and had her touch her nose with her fingers several times. Lisa could feel herself failing each test, her body refusing to cooperate even for these simple tasks. "I'd like to run some tests," Dr. Peterson said after the examination. "We'll start with some blood work and an MRI scan. There are several conditions that could cause the symptoms you're experiencing." The word conditions hung in the air like a dark cloud. Lisa had been hoping the neurologist would tell her it was nothing serious, maybe prescribe some different medication and send her home. Instead, she was looking at weeks of tests and uncertainty. The MRI was scheduled for the following week. Lisa had never had one before, and the thought of being trapped in that small, noisy tube for an hour made her anxiety even worse. Mike took the day off work to drive her to the appointment and wait with her. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together," he said, holding her shaking hand in the waiting room. But Lisa felt completely alone, even with Mike sitting right next to her. This was happening to her body, not his. She was the one who couldn't hold a cup of coffee or walk in a straight line. She was the one whose own muscles were rebelling against her. The MRI results came back normal, which should have been good news. But Dr. Peterson explained that normal brain scans didn't rule out many neurological conditions. They needed more tests, blood tests to check for autoimmune diseases, genetic testing to look for inherited conditions, something called an electromyography test that would measure the electrical activity in her muscles. Each test brought new hope and new disappointment. The blood work came back showing some minor abnormalities, but nothing that explained her symptoms. The genetic testing would take weeks to complete. The muscle test was uncomfortable and didn't provide any clear answers either. Meanwhile, Lisa's condition continued to get worse. She had to stop working almost entirely because she couldn't control her hands well enough to use the computer. The tremors were now affecting her voice too, making her words sound shaky and unclear. Simple phone conversations became embarrassing ordeals. Money became a serious problem. Without Lisa's income from her design business, the family was struggling to pay for both their regular bills and the mounting medical expenses. Some of the tests weren't fully covered by their insurance, and the co-pays were adding up quickly. Amy started taking on more responsibilities around the house. She would help her mother get dressed in the morning and cut up her food at dinner. The role reversal was heartbreaking for Lisa. She was supposed to be taking care of her daughter, not the other way around. I should be helping you with your homework, not having you help me button my shirt, Lisa said one evening, tears streaming down her face. Amy hugged her gently. It's okay, Mom. We're a family. We take care of each other. But it wasn't okay. Lisa felt like she was watching her old life disappear while she sat helplessly on the sidelines. She couldn't drive safely anymore because her legs would sometimes jerk unexpectedly. She stopped going out with friends because eating in public had become too embarrassing. Even simple tasks like showering required Mike's help now. After 6 weeks of tests and appointments, Dr. Peterson called them in for another consultation. She had consulted with colleagues and done more research, but she still didn't have a definitive diagnosis. Your symptoms are consistent with several different neurological conditions, she explained. It could be early onset Parkinson's disease, or possibly multiple sclerosis, or one of several other rare disorders. I'd like to refer you to a specialist at the university hospital who has more experience with unusual cases. Lisa felt like screaming. More doctors, more tests, more uncertainty. How could modern medicine not be able to tell her what was wrong with her own body? She had expected that doctors would be able to fix whatever was happening to her, or at least explain it clearly. The specialist at the university hospital was Dr. Chen, a man who looked like he was barely old enough to be out of medical school. But his credentials were impressive, and Dr. Peterson had spoken highly of his expertise in rare neurological disorders. Dr. Chen spent almost 2 hours with Lisa during their first appointment. He asked detailed questions about her family history when her symptoms first started, and how they had progressed. He had her perform dozens of small tests, touching her nose, walking heel-to-toe across the room, and following his finger with her eyes. I have a theory about what might be causing your symptoms, he said finally, but I need to do some additional testing to confirm it. This will involve more genetic testing, looking specifically for mutations that cause certain inherited neurological conditions. The word inherited hit Lisa like a punch in the stomach. If her condition was genetic, did that mean Amy might develop it too? The thought of her daughter going through the same nightmare she was experiencing was almost unbearable. While they waited for the genetic test results, Lisa's symptoms continued to worsen. She started using a walker around the house because her balance had become so unreliable. Her handwriting, which had once been her pride as an artist, was now completely illegible. Even signing her name had become impossible. The worst part was the unpredictability. Some days were better than others, which gave her false hope that maybe she was getting better. But then she would have a terrible day where she could barely function at all, and the reality of her situation would crash down on her again. Mike was struggling too, though he tried to hide it. He was working longer hours to make up for Lisa's lost income, then coming home to take care of her and help with household tasks that she could no longer manage. Their relationship was changing from husband and wife to caregiver and patient, and neither of them knew how to handle that transition. The months of medical uncertainty were almost as hard to bear as the physical symptoms. Not knowing what was wrong with her or how much worse it might get made every day feel like walking on thin ice. Lisa found herself constantly Googling her symptoms and reading about horrible diseases online. which only made her anxiety worse. Friends and family members kept asking how she was doing and when the doctors thought she might get better. Lisa didn't know how to explain that the doctors didn't know what was wrong with her, let alone how to fix it. She started avoiding phone calls and declining invitations, tired of having to explain her mysterious illness over and over again. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon in late September. Lisa was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, watching the leaves change color outside. Her hands were folded in her lap to keep them from shaking, and she was trying to enjoy one of the few peaceful moments she had these days. When the phone rang, Mike answered it. Lisa could tell from his voice that it was Dr. Chen calling with the genetic test results they had been waiting for. After 8 months of uncertainty, they were finally going to get some answers. "Yes, we can come in tomorrow morning," Mike was saying. "Thank you, Doctor." Lisa's heart started pounding. The fact that Dr. Chen wanted to see them in person instead of giving the results over the phone probably meant the news wasn't simple. Good news usually came in quick phone calls. Bad news required face-to-face conversations. That night, neither Lisa nor Mike slept much. They lay in bed holding hands, both afraid to say what they were thinking. After all these months of not knowing, they were about to find out what was stealing Lisa's body away from her, piece by piece. The next morning, Amy insisted on coming to the appointment with them. She had just turned 17 and was missing school to be there, but she said she needed to know what was happening to her mother. The three of them sat in Dr. Chen's office, waiting for news that would change their lives forever. Dr. Chen came in carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression that Lisa couldn't quite read. He sat down across from them and opened the folder carefully. "I have your genetic test results." He began slowly. The test found a mutation in a gene called ATXN3. This mutation causes a condition known as spinocerebellar ataxia type 3, or SCA3 for short. The words hung in the air like a foreign language. Lisa had never heard of SCA3, but somehow she knew that this was the enemy that had been attacking her body all these months. "What does that mean exactly?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen leaned forward in his chair. SCA3 is a genetic disorder that affects the part of your brain called the cerebellum. The cerebellum controls coordination, balance, and fine motor movements. The mutation causes brain cells in this area to slowly break down over time. Lisa felt like the room was spinning around her, brain cells breaking down. That explained why her body felt like it was betraying her. It wasn't her fault, and it wasn't something she could control through willpower or exercise. Her own genes were working against her. "Is there a cure?" Amy asked quietly from her chair next to Lisa. Dr. Chen's expression grew even more serious. "Currently, there is no cure for SCA3. It's a progressive condition, which means the symptoms will likely get worse over time. However, there are treatments that can help manage the symptoms and improve quality of life." The word progressive hit Lisa like a physical blow. She had been hoping that once they figured out what was wrong, there would be some kind of treatment that could fix everything. The idea that her condition would continue to get worse was almost too much to bear. "How much worse?" Lisa managed to ask, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Every case is different," Dr. Chen explained. Gently, some people progress very slowly over many years. Others experience more rapid changes. There's no way to predict exactly how your case will develop, but typically, the condition affects walking and balance first, then speech and swallowing, and eventually other motor functions. Lisa thought about what she had already lost: the ability to run marathons, the steady hand she needed for her artwork, the simple pleasure of eating a meal without making a mess. And now she was learning that this was just the beginning. "There's something else you need to know," Dr. Chen continued, looking directly at Amy. "SCA3 is an inherited condition. Since Lisa has the mutation, each of her children has a 50% chance of inheriting it as well." Amy went completely still in her chair. Lisa watched her daughter's face as she processed this information. Not only was Lisa's world falling apart, but Amy might be facing the same future. "Can we test Amy to see if she has it?" Mike asked. "We can," Dr. Chen said. But that's a very personal decision. Some people want to know. Others prefer not to find out unless symptoms develop. There are counselors who specialize in helping families make these kinds of decisions. The drive home was silent except for the sound of Lisa crying quietly in the passenger seat. Everything made sense now. The tremors, the balance problems, the way her muscles wouldn't obey her commands. But understanding what was happening didn't make it any easier to accept. That evening, the family sat around the kitchen table trying to process what they had learned. Amy had been unusually quiet since leaving the doctor's office. "I want to get tested," Amy said suddenly. "I need to know." Lisa's heart broke a little more. Her daughter was 17 years old and should be worrying about college applications and prom dates, not whether she had inherited a devastating neurological condition. "Are you sure?" "Honey," Mike asked, "you don't have to decide right now." "I'm sure," Amy said firmly. "If I have it, I want to know so I can plan my life accordingly. And if I don't have it, then at least we can stop worrying about that part." Over the next few days, Lisa found herself grieving for the future she had lost. She had always imagined growing old with Mike, traveling to places they had never been, maybe becoming a grandmother someday. Now she had to face the reality that her body was going to continue betraying her, taking away more and more of her independence. The hardest part was explaining the diagnosis to friends and family. Most people had never heard of SCA3, and Lisa found herself having to educate everyone about her own condition. Some people were supportive and understanding. Others seemed uncomfortable and didn't know what to say. Lisa's mother took the news particularly hard. She blamed herself, wondering if she had somehow passed on the genetic mutation without knowing it. Lisa tried to explain that her mother couldn't have known. That genetic conditions sometimes skip generations or appear out of nowhere. But her mother carried the guilt anyway. Amy's genetic test was scheduled for the following week. The waiting was almost unbearable. Lisa found herself watching her daughter constantly, looking for any signs of the early symptoms she now recognized. A slight tremor in Amy's hand while she was doing homework, a small stumble on the stairs. Every little thing made Lisa's heart race with fear. The night before Amy's test results were due, Lisa couldn't sleep at all. She kept thinking about what they would do if Amy had inherited the mutation. Would they tell her immediately or wait until she was older? How do you tell your child that their future might include the same struggles you're facing? But there was also a part of Lisa that felt almost relieved to finally have answers about her own condition. For months, she had felt like she was going crazy, like maybe the symptoms were all in her head. Now she knew that there was a real, physical reason for everything that was happening to her. The enemy had a name, and somehow that made it a little less frightening. Dr. Chen had given them information about support groups for people with SCA3 and their families. Lisa wasn't sure she was ready to meet other people going through the same thing, but Mike thought it might be helpful. The idea of talking to someone who truly understood what she was experiencing was both appealing and terrifying. As Lisa sat in her chair by the window that evening, watching the sunset behind the trees, she realized that her life had been divided into two parts: before the diagnosis and after the diagnosis. Everything she had taken for granted before, her health, her independence, her future plans, now had to be reconsidered through the lens of SCA3. But she also realized that she was still the same person inside. Her brain was still sharp. Her love for her family was unchanged, and her determination to make the best of whatever time she had was stronger than ever. The disease might be taking her body, but it couldn't touch the things that made her who she really was. Amy's test results came back negative when Dr. Chen called with the news. Lisa collapsed into Mike's arms and cried harder than she had in months, but this time, they were tears of relief and joy. Her daughter would not have to walk the same difficult path that Lisa was facing. "I feel like I can breathe again," Lisa told Mike that night. At least Amy will be okay. Knowing that Amy was safe gave Lisa a new kind of strength. She could face whatever was coming for her own body, as long as her daughter was protected from this disease. It was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, even though her own future remained uncertain. But Lisa quickly realized that simply knowing what was wrong with her wasn't enough. She needed to figure out how to live with SCA3, not just survive it. The first step was learning everything she could about her condition. Lisa spent hours reading websites and medical journals about spinocerebellar ataxia. She learned that while the disease was progressive, many people live with it for decades. Some famous musicians and artists had continued their careers even after being diagnosed. The key was adapting and finding new ways to do the things that mattered most. Dr. Chen referred Lisa to an occupational therapist named Jenny who specialized in helping people with neurological conditions. Jenny was an energetic woman in her 40s who had worked with many SCA patients over the years. The goal isn't to fight against your condition, Jenny explained during their first session. The goal is to work with it and find ways to maintain your independence for as long as possible. Jenny taught Lisa how to use adaptive tools that could help with daily tasks. Special grips for pens and utensils that were easier to hold with shaky hands. Voice recognition software that would let her continue doing graphic design work even when her hands became too unsteady to use a mouse. Simple exercises that could help maintain her balance and coordination. One of the most helpful things Jenny showed Lisa was how to modify her home environment. They moved frequently used items to lower shelves so Lisa wouldn't have to reach overhead. They installed grab bars in the bathroom and removed loose rugs that could cause falls. Small changes that made a big difference in Lisa's daily life. Lisa also started working with a speech therapist to address the changes in her voice. The therapist taught her exercises to strengthen the muscles involved in speaking, and techniques to make her words clearer even when her speech became more affected by the disease. But the biggest change came when Lisa decided to join a support group for people with SCA3. She had been hesitant at first, worried that seeing other people further along in their disease progression would be too depressing. But Mike encouraged her to try it, and Amy even offered to drive her to the first meeting. The support group met once a month in a community center across town. When Lisa walked into the room for the first time, she saw about 15 people of various ages, some using walkers or wheelchairs, others looking much like she did. The group leader was a woman named Patricia who had been living with SCA3 for 12 years. She was in a wheelchair but spoke clearly and had a warm, welcoming smile that immediately put Lisa at ease. "Everyone here understands what you're going through," Patricia told the group. "We've all faced the same fears and challenges, but we've also learned that life doesn't end with a SCA3 diagnosis. It just becomes different." Lisa listened as group members shared their stories. There was David, a former carpenter who had learned to create beautiful wooden sculptures even though he could no longer build houses. Maria, a teacher who had transitioned to tutoring students one-on-one when classroom teaching became too difficult. Robert, who had taken up painting after his handwriting became illegible, discovering an artistic talent he never knew he had. "The disease takes things away from us," Patricia explained, "but it also forces us to discover new parts of ourselves. I never thought I'd become an advocate for disability rights, but here I am, testifying before the state legislature and helping to change laws." For the first time since her diagnosis, Lisa felt hopeful about her future. These people weren't just surviving with SCA3, they were thriving in their own ways. They had found new purposes and new sources of meaning even as their bodies changed. Lisa started thinking about her own graphic design work differently. Instead of seeing her shaky hands as a limitation, she began experimenting with new artistic styles that incorporated the unpredictable movements. She discovered that voice recognition software allowed her to work faster in some ways, and she started offering services like website content writing that she had never considered before. Amy surprised everyone by becoming deeply involved in SCA3 research and advocacy. She started a fundraising campaign at her high school and organized a walk to raise money for research into treatments for the disease. Watching her daughter turn their family's challenge into a way to help others filled Lisa with incredible pride. "You inspired me, Mom," Amy told her one evening. If you can face this disease with so much courage, I can certainly help fight it from the outside. Mike also found new ways to support Lisa and their family. He learned to cook meals that were easier for Lisa to eat and took over many of the household tasks that had become difficult for her. But more importantly, he made sure Lisa knew that he still saw her as his wife and partner, not just as someone who needed care. "You're still the same woman I fell in love with," he told her one night as they slow danced in their living room to music from their wedding. SCA3 doesn't change. Lisa also decided to start a blog about living with a rare neurological disease. Writing had always been easier for her than speaking, and she found that sharing her experiences helped other newly diagnosed patients feel less alone. The blog grew quickly, and soon Lisa was receiving messages from people around the world who were dealing with similar challenges. One of the most meaningful parts of Lisa's new life was mentoring newly diagnosed patients. Dr. Chen would sometimes refer people to her who were struggling to accept their diagnosis or didn't know where to turn for support. Lisa would meet with them, share her story, and help them understand that ASCA3 diagnosis wasn't the end of their story. The first year is the hardest, Lisa would tell them. You spend so much time grieving for the life you thought you were going to have, but once you get through that, you start building a new life that can be just as meaningful, even if it's different. Lisa's relationship with her own body changed too. Instead of feeling betrayed by it, she began to see her body as something she was sharing space with rather than controlling. Some days were better than others, and she learned to work with her body's rhythms instead of fighting against them. 2 years after her diagnosis, Lisa was invited to speak at a medical conference about the patient experience with rare neurological diseases, standing at the podium, using a microphone because her voice had become softer. She looked out at an audience of doctors, researchers, and other patients. "SCA3 has taken a lot from me," she began, her words clear and strong despite the tremor in her voice. "It's taken my steady hands, my perfect balance, and some of my independence. But it's also given me things I never expected, a deeper appreciation for each day, a community of incredibly strong people who understand my journey, and a purpose I never knew I had." Lisa talked about the importance of treating patients as whole people, not just collections of symptoms. She emphasized how much hope and practical support could matter in the early days after diagnosis, and she shared her belief that while medical research was crucial for finding treatments and cures, it was equally important to help people live well with the conditions they had right now. After her speech, a young woman approached her. She had been recently diagnosed with SCA3 and was struggling with depression and fear about her future. "Thank you," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "I've been so scared, but listening to you gives me hope that I can still have a good life." Lisa hugged her gently. "You absolutely can. It will be different than you planned, but it can still be beautiful." That evening, Lisa sat in her garden with Mike and Amy, watching the sunset. Her hands were shaking more than they used to, and she needed a walker to get around safely now. But she felt more at peace than she had in years. "Do you ever regret the way things turned out?" Amy asked. Lisa considered the question carefully. "I regret having SCA3, she said honestly. "I wish I could still run marathons and use my hands the way I used to, but I don't regret the person this experience has helped me become. I've learned things about myself and about what really matters that I might never have discovered otherwise." As the stars came out, Lisa reflected on her journey from that first tremor in her hand to this moment of acceptance and purpose. She couldn't control what SCA3 would take from her next, but she had learned to control how she responded to those losses, and in that response, she had found a different kind of strength than she had ever known before.